Today, we're diving into some fascinating territory, maybe even a little unsettling.
Yeah, it's pretty striking, isn't it? How some political tactics, like digging up scandals on your opponent, that stuff seems timeless.
Absolutely, as old as politics itself, really. But while some things stay the same, Zakaria argues something really fundamental has shifted, especially in the last few centuries.
And that's exactly what we want to explore today. Our mission is to unpack Fareed Zakaria's book, The Age of Revolutions. He makes this case that these huge historical shifts, think early liberal revolutions, right up to today's upheavals in tech, globalization, identity, they always generate both incredible progress and these really powerful backlashes.
Right. And these forces, he argues, are fundamentally reshaping politics right now as we speak.
So, our goal here is to help you get a quick grasp of Zakaria's crucial points, the main arguments, and also those details that really make his case compelling. Think of this as your essential guide.
Yeah, a way to understand the complex forces that shape the modern world and what's driving the political landscape you see today.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture idea. The traditional political divide. For centuries, right? Politics pretty much everywhere was defined by this left-right split.
Pretty clearly, yeah.
Yeah.
You had this left wanting a stronger state, more regulation, redistribution, that kind of thing. And the right championing freer markets, less government. It shaped everything.
Elections, revolutions, you name it. But Zakaria's core argument is that this traditional divide, it's basically broken down, fundamentally.
And you can really see it. I mean, look at figures like Donald Trump in the U.S. or Boris Johnson in the U.K. They're considered right-wing, but they often don't follow that script, do they?
Not at all. Johnson went for big public spending. Trump attacked free trade deals, which used to be, Republican orthodoxy.
Exactly. And then you've got leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. They mix big government stuff with strong identity politics. Sometimes even attacking market capitalism while building these nationalist movements.
And it's not just a right-wing thing. On the left, you had figures like Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. Maybe they didn't win power nationally, but they definitely scorned the establishment.
And we see successful left-wing populists taking charge in Latin America, too. Chile, Colombia, Mexico, they're riding that anti-establishment wave.
So despite being all over the map ideologically, what do these new populists share?
Well, Zakaria points to a kind of dismissive attitude towards democratic norms. Things like, free speech, parliamentary rules, independent courts or institutions.
Right. There's this sense that the ends justify the means, a willingness to bend or even break democratic processes to get what they want.
And while maybe it's more common on the right these days, that illiberal streak can pop up anywhere on the spectrum.
Okay, quick clarification because this is important for understanding the book. When Zakaria uses the word liberal, what does he mean?
Good point. He's talking about classical liberalism, the Enlightenment ideas, individual rights, freedom of religion, open trade, market economics, rules-based international cooperation, that whole package.
So not liberal in the way it's often used in American politics today, meaning left of center?
Exactly. In Zakaria's classical sense, someone like Ronald Reagan, championing economic liberty, and someone like Bill Clinton, focusing on equality of opportunity within markets, they were both liberals.
And the key insight here is
that these new populists, whether they call themselves left or right, are fundamentally attacking that whole classical liberal project.
Got it. So how did we get to this point? Zakaria argues modern history isn't a straight line. It's had these major breaks driven by new ideas, new technologies, economic shifts.
Right. Multiple industrial revolutions, huge political and social upheavals. And the crucial point he makes again and again, these big, fast changes always provoke backlashes. Always.
Let's go back to the beginning then. Zakaria points to the Netherlands as the first real liberal revolution.
Yeah, it's amazing. The 17th century, this tiny waterlogged country somehow becomes the wealthiest place in Europe per person. And they did something incredible. They rejected absolute monarchy and created the Dutch Republic in 1588.
It really stands out, especially if you compare it to, say, Venice. Venice was an early republic, powerful for a while.
But it stalled. It basically locked its doors, institutionally speaking, became this closed-off, stagnant aristocracy that just couldn't adapt when the world changed.
And that stagnation elsewhere kind of pushed others, like Portugal and Spain, to find new ways, right? New trade routes.
Exactly. Vasco da Gama, Columbus, they bypassed the old middlemen. That was the start of truly global trade, kicking off this era of early globalization.
Meanwhile, the Dutch were just innovating like crazy. Their revolution against the Habsburgs involved embracing Calvinism, even smashing religious icons, which led to brutal crackdowns, of course.
But out of that conflict came this economic powerhouse. They mastered shipbuilding, map-making, navigation, became the world's shippers.
And they had this relatively open society for the time. They welcomed refugees like Jews fleeing Spain. It became a hub for ideas, Descartes, Spinoza thinkers who couldn't easily publish elsewhere in Europe because of censorship.
It was a different culture. Their cities thrived with professionals, merchants, bankers. Unlike other elites focused on land, the Dutch embraced business. Zakaria notes this, quote, "The pursuit of private gain was not considered an unlawful or immoral act." That was revolutionary then.
But the Golden Age didn't last forever.
No, the disaster year 1672, when France under Louis XIV invaded, was a major blow. But ironically, that invasion helped William of Orange consolidate power.
And he's the one who eventually takes Dutch ideas across the channel to England.
Precisely. Which brings us to the Glorious Revolution in England, 1688, often called bloodless, but Zakaria points out it was actually a successful invasion by William of Orange.
And it had truly revolutionary effects, creating this kind of Anglo-Dutch fusion.
Yeah, and this was possible partly because England itself was changing economically. Wool production led to the enclosure movement, privatizing common land. It caused huge social disruption, but also created a richer society, more market-oriented. Money-making became, essential, not shameful.
But England had been torn apart before that, right? The Civil War in the 1640s, king versus parliament, even executing the king.
Deep divisions. And they were rivals with the Dutch economically for a long time, even fought trade wars. But the threat from Louis XIV's France basically forced them together.
So English leaders actually invited William of Orange to invade.
They did. James II fled. William took the throne. And William, while using some, let's say, illiberal tactics like anti-Catholic sentiment to gain power, ultimately governed differently.
How so?
His government embraced religious toleration for Protestants anyway, and crucially cemented the power of Parliament. That laid the groundwork for modern Britain.
So 1688 leads to a kind of cooling down of conflict.
A remarkable moderation, yeah. The main factions, Tories and Whigs, found common ground, passed the Bill of Rights in 1689. They adopted a Dutch-style messy pluralism, allowing different ideas to coexist. Thinkers like Newton and Locke thrived in that environment.
So Zakaria sees three key things coming out of this: the Anglo-Dutch fusion, political moderation, and adopting that liberal commercial Dutch model.
Right. But he warns against seeing this as inevitable progress, what historians sometimes call Whig history. He argues liberalism surviving was actually precarious, a deviation, not some guaranteed outcome.
Which makes the French story even more interesting by contrast. England's path was gradual, messy. France went for radical, top-down change.
And Zakaria uses that image of the mob storming the Tuileries Palace in 1792, comparing it to January 6th, this raw fury aimed at the legislature.
He breaks down the French Revolution through key figures.
Yeah, 3 acts almost. First, Lafayette, the liberal noble who wanted moderate reform but failed. Robespierre, the radical populist. The reign of terror, the term terrorism comes from this period. It just spiraled into paranoia, the revolution eating its own, as they said.
And finally, Napoleon.
Napoleon seizes power, brings in modern reforms like his legal code, whips up this intense nationalism, but ultimately turns the revolution authoritarian. He even cuts a deal with the Pope to bring back Catholicism. Nationalism easily slides into demagoguery.
So why did France fail to absorb that classical liberalism the way Britain did?
Zakaria points to deeper issues. France hadn't really embraced pluralism or competition. Think of Louis XIV kicking out the Huguenots, a huge brain drain of skilled workers. The revolutionaries also tried to impose abstract ideals from above, like that weird new calendar, totally disconnected from how people actually lived.
Edmund Burke saw this contrast clearly.
He did. He admired the English Revolution's gradual conservation and correction. He saw the French one as abstract, rootless, illiberal, and inevitably violent.
And the legacy of the French Revolution wasn't just internal.
No, its militarized nationalism inspired others. It also fueled identity politics, especially on the right, which turned towards romanticism, nostalgia, rejecting modernity. And its violence discredited rational democratic reform for a long time.
But the desire for change didn't vanish.
Not at all. The 1848 revolutions across Europe forced even monarchies to make liberal concessions, social welfare programs, creating parliaments, ending serfdom. Change kept coming.
Okay, let's pivot to the modern challenges, starting with the Industrial Revolution. Its impact was just
You
enormous.
see it in that hockey stick graph of world GDP Zakaria mentions. From the mid-1800s, it just shoots up. Unprecedented. That's what created the modern world, really.
British industrialization led the way. New inventions, tinkerers everywhere. It changed daily life profoundly. Wages rose, people lived longer.
And Zakaria makes a powerful point. Industrialization was the first step to female liberation. Women went into factories, earned wages, organized for rights, eventually got the vote. He calls it history's greatest social revolution.
But not everyone cheered.
Far from it. Conservatives worried about moral decay. And the new left Engels, Marx saw exploitation and alienation, real social disruption.
And the political changes in Britain, free trade, more voting rights, they didn't happen smoothly either.
No, it took massive pressure from below. Luddites, smashing machines, Chartists demanding rights, often met with brutal repression from the state.
And this reshaped British politics, too.
Big time. The old parties realigned. The Tories, maybe surprisingly, ended up championing free markets. The Whigs evolved into the Liberals, becoming more focused on workers' rights, regulation, the beginnings of the social democratic left, influenced by thinkers like John Stuart Mill.
And the U.S.
The U.S. basically jumped on board, even copied or borrowed British technology. By the late 19th century, it was an industrial giant, overtaking Britain. Think massive cities, the railroads spanning the continent.
And it changed American politics just as profoundly.
Absolutely. The Democrats, who had been about states' rights, became more skeptical of big business wanting government to step in. Republicans became the party of free markets, though Teddy Roosevelt's progressivism was a key exception.
Then came the second industrial revolution, centered in the U.S. Oil, cars, Ford's assembly line.
Right. Bringing huge convenience, but also environmental costs starting to pile up. And FDR's New Deal, responding to the Great Depression, really cemented the Democrats as the party of the welfare state.
Okay, now let's talk globalization, the more recent waves. You mentioned the open versus closed debate becoming central.
Yeah, it's arguably as important now as left versus right. Protectionism, cultural anxieties, they're driving politics in ways that cut across the old economic divides.
But globalization isn't entirely new. The 19th century had its own version.
It did. Fueled by technologies that defeated distance, refrigerated ships, steamships, railroads, the telegraph. The world became interconnected. As the historian Hobsbawm said, history from now on became world history.
And there was even a culture of internationalism back then.
There was. The word international itself became common. But that early globalization also triggered nationalist backlashes. Protectionism rose. Foreigners were scapegoated like the Chinese Exclusion Act in the U.S. See the pattern.
Progress and backlash.
Always. Then after World War II, leaders, especially in the U.S., saw the dangers of isolationism and protectionism that had contributed to the wars.
So the U.S. promoted openness?
Yes, championed institutions like the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, used its power, its unipolar moment after the Cold War to underwrite a relatively open global order.
And then came hyperglobalization.
The jet age, container ships, plus financial deregulation, the Washington Consensus. That fueled the boom of the 1990s. Communism collapsed, new countries joined the global market, developing nations started competing fiercely.
And the China shock, the idea that China joining the WTO devastated Western manufacturing.
Zakaria argues it's more complicated. Yes, there were impacts, but significant job losses and inequality in the West started before China's rise, often due to automation or the shift of high-end manufacturing, not just low-wage competition.
Which brings us neatly to the information technology revolution, the third industrial revolution.
You could call it that. Its speed and reach are incredible, but its effects are sometimes subtler, more about information, communication, how we think.
From military origins to the World Wide Web becoming public in '91.
And the adoption speed is just mind-blowing. Facebook hit 100 million users in 4 years. Instagram, 2 years. ChatGPT, 2 months.
It's changed everything, how we work, connect, entertain ourselves, learn. Huge benefits.
Huge benefits, yes. Flexible work, seeing family on FaceTime, learning anything online. But Zakaria says there's a steep price.
Like what?
Well, the speed of online life makes messy, slow democracy seem frustrating. Easier to like a strong man saying, I alone can fix it. It's also hollowed out local communities. Software is eating the world, as Mark Andreessen put it. Weaken traditional ties.
And it worsens existing problems.
Definitely. Loneliness, atomization. Hannah Arendt warned about how those create fertile ground for extreme ideologies. And economic inequality gets amplified. Great time to have unique skills. Terrible time to have ordinary ones.
This feeds into that anywheres versus somewheres idea.
Exactly. The mobile educated anywheres derive identity from achievements, adaptable skills. The somewheres are rooted in place, tradition. That gap fuels populist resentment against coastal elites, or whoever the target is.
And the internet itself isn't always a force for good.
No. Movements organized online can turn illiberal, violent. Authoritarian states like China and Russia work hard to control the internet. And McLuhan's global village, it can feel more like a village of busybodies, enforcing conformity in online echo chambers through social ostracism.
What about robots taking our jobs? Automation.
It's a perennial fear. We see it with things like self-checkout. But it's not always straightforward. Zakaria mentions the surprising rise of hand car washes in Britain de-automation because labor was cheaper.
But AI like ChatGPT feels different.
It does. It can write code, generate text. Some say the hottest new programming language is English. It raises huge questions, potential for disruption, but also debate about things like robot taxes versus efficiency gains. Fundamentally, it challenges our idea of what makes humans unique.
Like the Copernican revolution shifting our place in the cosmos.
Maybe a profound identity challenge. And that connects to the biotechnology revolution, editing life itself.
It's part of the information revolution. In a way, information encoded in DNA.
Exactly, allowing us to potentially direct the evolution of our own species.
The COVID vaccines were an incredible example of the potential.
Absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah.
mRNA vaccines developed at unbelievable speed, saving millions. Science at its best.
But then,
Politics take it away, as Zakaria puts it. Vaccine mandates became culture war fuel for populists, tangled up in misinformation.
and we see similar anxieties with GMOs.
Right. Things like virus-resistant papayas saved a whole industry in Hawaii. But then you have fierce resistance to golden rice, engineered to fight vitamin A deficiency, with activists destroying test crops out of fear or ideology.
And CRISPR gene editing takes it to another level.
Huge potential to cure genetic diseases like sickle cell, but massive ethical questions, especially after that Chinese scientist edited human embryos. Are we heading towards a brave new world of designed babies? It challenges the core liberal idea of fundamental human equality.
The Homo Deus idea, humans becoming godlike.
That's Harari's term. But there are positive visions too. AI tutors like in the Diamond Age, tools freeing us from drudgery like Aristotle dreamed, maybe a world where every man a king.
Okay, let's shift to the identity revolution. Zakaria points back to 1968.
As a key turning point, yeah. Student protests globally weren't just about war or politics, but also challenging consumerism, traditional authority. It foreshadowed the rise of identity politics.
And by the 80s and 90s, culture wars really took center stage, especially in the US.
Definitely. Pat Buchanan's 1992 speech about a cultural war for the soul of America really captured that shift. Economics became less central to the political fight.
But that earlier consensus period, the mid-20th century, wasn't exactly a utopia for everyone, was it?
Not at all. It rested heavily on racial exclusion, Jim Crow in the U.S., restrictive immigration laws. And interestingly, political scientists back in 1950 were actually complaining about too much consensus between the parties, calling for more polarization.
Be careful what you wish for.
Right. Then came the massive cultural shifts of the 60s and 70s. Music, drugs, attitudes towards sex, family, a huge loss of trust in institutions, government, church. That created space for populism and, frankly, conspiracy theories to grow.
And deep generational divides opened up.
Stark divides. In Germany, young people confronting their parents' generation about complicity in Nazism. In the U.S., think about the reactions to Obama's election or shifting views on immigration.
And this identity revolution provoked its own backlash.
A massive backlash, Zakaria calls it, from groups who felt their status was threatened: white people, men, Christians. They developed their own identity politics, focused on whiteness, masculinity. Law and order became a potent political theme.
You also had huge changes from feminism's second wave.
Seismic shifts. Beyond just voting rights to demands for equal opportunity, reproductive rights like Roe v. Wade, childcare, the pill played a big role. And then the LGBTQ plus rights movement gained momentum, especially after Stonewall in '69.
But this also triggered a counterreaction.
Yes, the 70s saw a significant Christian backlash, particularly against women's and gay rights. It started splitting denominations and pushing religious conservatives firmly toward the political right, while secularism became more aligned with the left.
And then leaders like Clinton and Blair tried to find a third way.
They did. They adopted more market-friendly economic policies, trying to bridge the old left-right divide. But the effect was that economic convergence pushed cultural issues even more to the forefront of political battles,
Europe faced its own identity crisis later on.
especially around the 2010s migrant crisis. Fears about integration, Islamic fundamentalism that fueled populist movements across the continent. You saw novels like Houellebecq's Submission tapping into those anxieties.
And in the US, polarization seems especially intense.
Zakaria notes it's more polarized than many other Western countries, partly because party identity is now so deeply tied to personal identity, race, religion, geography. Changing parties feels like betraying your tribe.
Again, secularization plays a role.
It's a reinforcing cycle.
Hmm.
As the right becomes more identified with politicized Christianity, secular Americans move left and maybe abandon religion altogether and vice versa. It just keeps amplifying the culture wars.
Okay, finally, let's look at the geopolitical revolutions. The global order is shifting.
Zakaria uses the ancient idea of the Thucydides trap, how rising powers inevitably clash with established ones, like Athens and Sparta. That's the frame for today's shifts.
Britain in the 19th century provides a kind of model.
As a dominant hyperpower, yeah. It provided global public goods like policing the seas, suppressing the slave trade, linked its power to a sense of mission.
But the US image is changing now.
Definitely. It used to be seen globally as the model of modernity, wealth. Now, with figures like Trump and intense internal division, Zakaria says it's often seen as a symbol of dysfunction.
While China rises.
Xi Jinping is very clear about his vision. The East rising and the West declining. China sees itself moving to center stage, maybe even becoming the new power that guarantees the global trading system.
And Russia.
Putin's actions, especially in Ukraine, are driven by revanchism, a sense the West is weak. But the international response cutting Russia off from financial systems, freezing assets, shows the power of that existing order, even if Russia itself is, overall, a declining power despite its military.
So the US's post-Cold War dominance was just a phase.
A temporary unipolar moment. History's back, Zakaria suggests, with multiple power centers, new ambitions, new anxieties driving China and Russia.
And internally, Xi is cracking down.
His third revolution involves reasserting state control over the private sector, suppressing dissent, partly out of fear of Western contamination. Zakaria calls it almost a softer version of Mao's Cultural Revolution.
So the biggest threat isn't necessarily military.
It's this broader illiberal challenge, populist nationalism, whether in India, under Modi, or elsewhere. Enlightenment ideas are losing ground, sometimes dismissed as just Western imports. That illiberalism, Zakaria argues, is the biggest threat to progress globally.
So wrapping all this up, what's the takeaway for us living through this?
Well, Zakaria quotes Walter Lippmann from way back in 1929. Lippmann saw that modern revolutions bring progress, sure, but they also have this huge psychological impact. They strip away the old anchors, faith, tradition, community. Marx and Engels famously said, all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned.
It's this constant cycle. Progress creates disruption. Disruption creates backlash.
Exactly. Even the successful revolutions like the Dutch and British faced huge resistance. And France is the cautionary tale about trying to impose radical change top.
And liberalism itself creates a kind of anxiety.
Because it doesn't tell you how to live. It offers freedom, but freedom can be, well, unnerving. Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom. It's often easier to follow a rigid doctrine or a strong leader.
Which opens the door for populism, nationalism.
The escape from freedom, as Erich Fromm called it. They offer simple answers, clear identities, family, nation, God, as Orban or Putin might emphasize, instead of messy individual choice.
And Zakaria has this really provocative idea that we are part of the problem.
In a way, yeah. Our individual choices, choosing Amazon over the local store, moving for a better job, they collectively create the disruption that then makes many people feel anxious and look for easy answers. We are the acids of modernity.
So the challenge is managing that disruption.
That's the core task. Take migration uncontrolled waves, clearly fuel populism. So you need fair, rules-based systems.
He mentions Singapore as an interesting case study.
Lee Kuan Yew's approach, intentionally building a shared civic identity in a very diverse place, mixed housing, schools, while still letting people keep their cultural traditions. Trying to create somewheres with shared ground, not just disconnected anywheres.
And the key lesson remains gradualism.
Change that works with the grain of society, bottom up, like the Dutch and British examples, tends to be more stable than top-down revolutions like the French. Conservatism, in the Burkean sense, isn't anti-liberal. It's about caution, continuity.
So compromise is essential.
Finding ways to bridge the divides. Zakaria even points to some of Biden's policies, backing away from new trade deals, subsidizing manufacturing, even the border wall stuff, as pragmatic compromises needed to preserve the overall liberal project, giving a little to save the core. Ultimately, the challenge Zakaria leaves us with is finding moral meaning within this ongoing journey of progress and disruption. Can we build community and purpose around liberal ideas themselves?